As business navigates an increasingly uncertain trade environment, tariffs and CUSMA are raising important questions for the Canadian economy. In this episode, we explore the latest deal that's been made between Canada and the United States to settle the trade war. To help us with the discussion is Peter Hall. Peter is the CEO of Econosphere Inc., a boutique business strategy advisory firm. He advises leading Canadian industry associations and corporations, provides insights and promotes international initiatives, and leads a range of strategic projects. And a regular guest here on MBOT TV Zoomcast. Welcome, Peter.
It's good to be with you again, David.
Well, Peter, you're fresh off vacation, so I know that you're going to be completely fresh with ideas. And of course, the one thing that was happening as you were traveling back from vacation is the latest trade talk breakthrough between the United States and Canada. Of course, over the last week, there has been many discussions and some fear that this discussion was going to fall by the wayside, and Canada would have been faced with 50% tariffs on a number of items. So 11th hour, once again, there seems to be a reprieve. So Peter, lead us through what's happening in the latest talks.
Well, 11th hour is an understatement, David. This one really came down to the wire in the most dramatic of ways. Although we're getting kind of used to the drama, this is not even a 2.0 kind of experience. Back in 2017 was the beginning of a series of dramatic moments affecting North American trade, and nothing is really different. So if there's something that's dependable inside of all of this, it's that brinksmanship is going to be the order of the day for the foreseeable future. That's probably the most important point we can make here, because when uncertainty on something that is so fundamentally important to both economies is heightened, and in a perpetual heightened state, investment freezes up. And that's what we're seeing north of the border here. We're also seeing it south of the border. So it's not really accomplishing the intention of all of this uncertainty stateside. What it's supposed to be doing is drawing in all kinds of investment from the rest of the world. And if I'm reading the numbers correctly, non-residential investment in the United States is in deep trouble. And this is because no business is going to invest into a situation where the protections that are there that intend to draw the business in might be gone tomorrow. People just don't invest into an uncertain environment like that. They want to know where things are going to be in the future. And so that's probably point number one inside of all of this, but there's a lot we can talk about.
And we noticed, I believe I saw a story yesterday that the 30-year U.S. Treasury bond creeped up a little bit as well. So that's not a good signal for the United States economy as well. So that's another topic for another day. $900 billion of trade is at stake going back and forth across the U.S.-Canada border. If these tariffs had been put in place, what would that have done to the Canadian economy?
Well, it would have been nothing short of devastating, I believe, David. Other tariffs have been targeted. Tariffs have been imposed, but businesses were, they had heavy incentive, I guess, to really make sure that they were USMCA compliant. And so they were able to get around the tariffs, and most of them just did their paperwork and were able to operate fairly normally. And that goes from small manufacturers to some of the most significant high capital intensive manufacturers here in Canada, particularly in southwestern Ontario. This was not going to be the case. These were tariffs that were going to be extremely punitive, and there were manufacturers all over the place that were accelerating production in order to get ahead of delivery from today's deadline. Now that deadline's been kicked off 3 days. There's a great sigh of relief, but 3 days is nothing in the grand scheme of things. There's still very heightened uncertainty here, and particularly small and medium-sized businesses are the ones that are still sitting on the edge of their seats. They're probably using this 3-day reprieve to try and get more of those orders shipped ahead of the deadline, just in case. This is very distortive to the economy because it causes a pileup of inventories, a rush of orders, and then a quiet period afterwards. It's very disruptive for the economy. And this being the summer, of course, it's an even more volatile time just in terms of the traditional softness that we would go through. So this is what they're coping with. I know personally manufacturers who have been involved in this game, and they've been burning the midnight oil trying to get ahead of all of this. So it's extremely disruptive. The reason that they're actually doing that is they know full well just how much duress they would be under if those tariffs were actually imposed.
Peter, I'm going to call on your knowledge in economics, which is vast. I know I've teased you many times that I'm equipped with a first year course in economics, but there's been much talk about what would happen if these tariffs did go into place. How would the Canadian government be able to subsidize companies? So that gets into taking care of companies so that they can keep their prices lower, which brings in, the topic of false floors in the economy. So help us understand, what does that do to the Canadian economy when the government starts putting those subsidies in place?
Well, first of all, they need to know that they are going to be OECD and WTO compliant subsidies. So if they do put them into place, they've got to be able to justify that this is, extreme duress, that businesses are under. These are temporary measures to tie them through a period of time. There are all kinds of stipulations that would have to be satisfied in order to keep us whole with other nations that we trade with. The other question, though, is affordability. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors that are playing into the actual debt situation that Canada is in at the moment. And some very creative accounting is going on. But when you look at the standardized OECD calculations of government debt to GDP, consolidated, so it's not just federal, but it's the sum of all the provinces as well, we're not in great shape. We're beyond the thresholds that caused the toppling of an historic Canadian political party back in 1993. Remember, the Conservatives were obliterated at that time, all but, they had two people sitting in the House of Commons, and the Reform Party came up the middle. And what was the thing that brought them to that point? Well, it was the warnings that we were getting from ratings agencies that Canada's debt was not sustainable. It was on this trajectory that was going to go over 100% debt to GDP. Well, we're north of that now, and everybody seems to be yawning about that, including the ratings agencies. And so, here we are in a situation where we've got to ask ourselves seriously, even if we wanted to subsidize industries here, the cost of that is so punishing, and our own debt situation just does not give us room to do that, that one would have to question how sustainable we would be in a number of months. So it's not necessarily an option that we have.
I know it's very difficult to comply with World Trade Organizations and international rules when you're playing a game with someone that doesn't seem to really care about international rules. On the we've got like about a minute to go here, Peter. If you could quickly comment on that debt to GDP ratio. Before COVID, we were in very good shape, with respect to our G7 counterparts. But COVID took a toll on everybody's debt to GDP. And then, of course, now the trade war and the tariffs are playing havoc with us. Give us like a very quick history of where were we debt to GDP prior to COVID, and where are we today, and why is that a dangerous zone to be in?
Well, David, I would actually rewind a little further back and say we were in very good shape in the pre-global financial crisis time. Everybody was coming to Canada and asking us, how are you doing this? And of course, we had done some really difficult fiscal retooling in the 1990s that set us on course to actually eliminate all of our federal debt. And successive governments of different stripes came in and were still very wedded to doing things this way. And Canada was enjoying a great honeymoon with the rest of the world. Everybody who was trying to do fiscal discipline was coming to us. However, the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009 was so devastating that even a very prudent-minded government decided that they had no option but to get in there with heavy stimulus. And the world agreed. Everybody got in with heavy stimulus in 2010, 11, 12, 13, and the economy just wasn't recovering. I remember famously, President Obama at the time saying, I'm spending hundreds of billions of dollars this quarter, and I spent hundreds of billions of dollars last quarter, and I'm not getting any growth out of the economy. And, that was an interesting statement because he was just replacing every quarter what he had been spending the last time around. That's zero growth, and he had a zero growth economy. And what was fundamentally misunderstood was that this was going to be a long recovery because of the nature of the economic collapse that we saw. And so we dug ourselves in a really big way over those years. And COVID only topped that up. Okay, so COVID was an expensive endeavor. And that's what generally pushed the Western world north of the 100% debt to GDP level. So almost every economy, and almost every large economy, with the exception of Germany, is above that threshold. And that's a very dangerous place for the world to be in. And we could do a whole podcast on that one, David. We do not have a lot of fiscal room. And you've heard it here. We cannot afford our next recession. That's the situation that we are in.
Interesting that you take us back to just before the financial crisis in the late 2010s. And coincidentally, who was the governor of the Bank of Canada at that time was our own Prime Minister, Mark Carney, took over in October of 2007. So it's interesting, full circle. He's gone from being the governor of the Bank of Canada when we had a fantastic debt to GDP ratio to now when I think he's going to have to put his economist hat back on. If you like this video, give it a like. And if you're enjoying the content, smash that subscribe button and get notified of our next episode. Thanks to Peter Hall for being my guest today. This is David Wojcik from MBOT TV's Zoomcast, wishing you continued success in your business.